A plane crash owns the news for a week. You board your next flight and your heart pounds before the wheels leave the ground. But the drive to the airport that morning carried a far higher risk of killing you than the flight ahead, and you did not think about that drive once. So why does your brain insist on the plane? Why does it insist on the rare event, the one you can picture in perfect detail? The obvious answer feels right. You fear the plane because a plane crash is catastrophic, sudden, and leaves 1,000 headlines. A car trip is routine, forgettable, almost boring. That story, the story that big and dramatic things must be dangerous, is so intuitive that most people never question it. But it is wrong in a very specific way, and the real mechanism is sitting right there in the gap between the news and your pounding heart. The real mechanism is called the availability heuristic, a term coined by the psychologists Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky in the early 1970s. The idea is almost insultingly simple. When you need to estimate how likely something is, your brain does not consult a database of statistics. It consults memory. It asks one question: how easy is it to recall an example? If examples come quickly, the event feels frequent. If nothing comes to mind, the event feels rare or impossible. The crash is easy to recall. You would have to try hard to forget the image of the fuselage, the interviews, the ticker at the bottom of the screen. The drive through the morning traffic produces no image at all. So your brain scores the plane as dangerous and the drive as harmless. The math never enters the room. And here is the flip. The availability heuristic is not a mistake machine. It is a fast, efficient shortcut that is right most of the time, because in the world where it evolved, things that happened often left dense traces in memory. If you remembered plenty of examples of tigers near the river was probably dangerous. The problem arrives when memory gets a signal that has nothing to do with frequency. Vividness, emotional charge, recency, and repetition by media all make a memory easier to retrieve. All four are bundled into a single plane crash story. The result is that your fear of flying tracks the quality of the broadcast, not the probability of the accident. The intuition that big and catastrophic equals likely is a story your brain tells itself after the real work is done. Tversky and Kahneman demonstrated the unreliability of the shortcut with a deceptively trivial question. Which is more common in English, words that begin with the letter K or words that have K as their third letter? Most people say words that begin with K. Try it. Kangaroo, kitchen, kite, koala. The third letter examples are harder to summon, like acknowledge or awkward, or the word look. But when you actually count through a dictionary, words with K in the third position outnumber words that start with K by almost 2 to 1. You can know the dictionary count and still feel the first answer in your gut. That feeling is availability. Your memory was a poor sample of the English language, and it felt exactly like knowledge. The same machinery that lies to you about letters is the machinery that hands you your verdict on airplanes. The stakes go far beyond the airport. Researchers later asked people to estimate the number of deaths per year in the United States from various causes. The estimates were a perverse mirror of the news cycle. People massively overestimated deaths from accidents, homicides, floods, tornadoes, and shark attacks, all of which are vivid and easily pictured. They massively underestimated deaths from strokes, diabetes, asthma, and other conditions that kill quietly and produce no satisfying footage. Diabetes alone kills more Americans each year than car crashes, homicides, and lightning strikes combined. You will not see a minute of coverage of it tonight. The pattern is not a failure of your education. It is a direct consequence of how your memory is stocked. Your brain counts retrieval ease as frequency, and modern media is optimized to make the rare unforgettable and the common invisible. Now consider how the loop feeds itself. News organizations select stories by drama, not by incidents. A plane crash gets weeks of coverage precisely because it is rare, which means your memory gets repeated doses of a single extreme event. The other flights that same day, roughly 100,000 of them, get nothing. This is the crucial asymmetry. The common event is silent, so it is quickly forgotten, and because it is forgotten, it rates as unlikely. The rare event is loud, so it stays fresh, and because it stays fresh, it rates as probable. The result is that the frequency of coverage and the frequency of actual events are not just out of sync. In many cases, they are inverted. The thing you are most afraid of is frequently the thing you are least likely to face. So when does this shortcut ever serve you? It serves you when the memory comes from your own life rather than from a screen. If you slip on a wet stair in your own building, the sharp image of that moment stays with you, and you genuinely do walk more carefully. The heuristic is doing its job, translating real experience into caution. The breakage starts when the source of the memory is not experience but coverage. This is why media exposure is such a strange and powerful actor in your life. It slips into your memory as if it were experience with the same weight, and then your brain treats the memory of a broadcast as a memory of a thing that happened to you. The fear of flying is, in this sense, a fear of watching television. A second limit is that the heuristic cannot be switched off by knowledge. You can recite the statistics, and the pounding heart will not listen, because the fear is not being generated by a belief about probability. It is being generated by the ease with which your memory supplies an image. This is why the standard advice to just think about how safe flying is always fails. It fails because thinking about how safe flying is makes no image. It produces no retrieval. It gives the heuristic nothing to work with. The rational correction is not a memory of a flight going normally, because normal flights are boring, and your brain already wrote them off as uninformative. The only correction that works is one that hijacks the same machinery. Replace the memory question with a counting question. Here is a concrete way to do it, and it changes the feeling almost immediately. When you are about to board, do not ask how many crash stories you can recall. Ask how many flights happened today. The answer is roughly 100,000 commercial departures around the globe, and roughly 100,000 of those pass every single day without a fatal accident. Then ask how many of those flights made the news. None. Your memory is full of exceptions, and the count of exceptions tells you nothing about the rule. The rule is the boring, endless, silent majority of events. If you want your fear to reflect reality, you have to count the boring events on purpose, because your memory will never do it for you. There is an even deeper wrinkle here, something the researchers discovered when they tried to correct these biases. When you present people with a small concrete fact about their favorite fear, the mind resists. It does not simply update the way a thermometer would. This resistance has a name, the affect heuristic, a cousin of availability. The emotional image of the plane crash, once it is in your mind, infects every subsequent piece of information. A statistic saying 1 in 11 million feels cold, and a cold number rarely beats a vivid picture. Psychologists have found that feelings of risk and judgments of risk are generated together by the same quick emotional response, and that this response tends to dominate statistical reasoning. Your feelings and your estimates are stitched into the same tissue, and you cannot pull them apart just by wanting to. This explains a set of everyday behaviors that otherwise look irrational. It explains why people drive without a seatbelt through a snowstorm while canceling a flight on a clear day. It explains why the fear of a shark attack empties a beach even though the number of drowning deaths in the same area that year is probably higher. It explains why a tiny risk of radiation gets more public alarm than an immediate risk of falling, which kills tens of thousands of older people each year. None of these people are stupid. They are all running the same smooth, ancient subroutine, and the subroutine was not built for cable news. The results look like statistical illiteracy, but they are actually a predictable output of a normally functioning brain. The mismatch is modern. The machinery is prehistoric. The availability heuristic is ancient because it solved a real problem. In the environment of early humans, there were no statistics, no charts, no insurance tables. There were only memories, and the memories that came easiest were the ones that mattered. A survivor's vivid memory of a predator attack was not a distortion. It was a gift. It kept the group alive. The cost of overestimating the risk of a predator was small. The cost of underestimating it was death. So evolution selected for brains that treat easy recall as high probability. We are the descendants of the paranoid ancestors, and their paranoia is still running your risk assessment long after the world changed around it. Now we can see why driving feels safe even though it is the greater risk. Driving is available to you, but in a different way. It is common, which should make it memorable, and yet it is undramatic, which makes each individual instance forgettable. The 100-car trips you survived do not register as crashes avoided. They register as nothing. And here is the strange part. You drive because you have survived it many times, and the cautious fear you reserve for planes is a fear of something you have almost certainly never experienced at all. Your risk perception is built entirely from what your memory offers, and what your memory offers is a function of what your attention feeds it. You fear the plane because you have seen the crash on a screen. You trust the car because no crash image of your own commute exists in your memory. So what is the honest conclusion for a brain that will never control what it recalls? You cannot disable the availability heuristic. The image of the fuselage will stay vivid, and the heart will still pound, because the heart remembers stories long after the mind has accepted the statistics. But you can do one practical thing. Refuse to let the question be, how easily can I imagine this happening to me? Replace it with, how often does this actually happen, in numbers I can check? The first question will always overestimate the dramatic. The second is the only defense you have against a memory that was stalked by the newsroom rather than by your life. You will have to do this on purpose, every single time, because nothing about the design of your mind will do it for you. The next time your chest tightens on takeoff, understand what it is. It is not a probability assessment. It is a memory retrieval. And the drive home, statistically speaking, is where you should be paying attention, even though it will never feel like the riskiest hour of your day. The danger you can picture is rare. The danger that is most likely to hurt you is the one you cannot picture at all, because it has never once been vivid enough to earn a place in your memory. The plane will land. The drive will remain exactly what it has always been, the real risk your brain never learned to see. Now you can watch that machinery working in your own chest the next time the plane rumbles down the runway. And maybe, one day soon, you will trust the boring numbers over the unforgettable image, and that will be the closest thing to safety your brain will ever let you feel.